The scout hovered, invisible, 30 meters above the forest floor, still, silent, shrouded in adaptive camo and electromagnetic dampeners. Her 4 compound eyes tracked the lone human trudging beneath her, his figure small against the looming skeletal trees and the violet-leafed canopy. Data scrolled across her retinal HUD in thin amber lines. Oxygen 31%. Humidity 92%. Surface predators 9 detected within 5 clicks. Estimated survival time for the human 3.7 minutes. Her thoracic tendrils clicked softly in anticipation. Not fear her kind had evolved past that, but a prickling edge of clinical curiosity. Her caste had observed countless species across half the spiral arm. None had survived Vorth Prime for more than half a rotation without armor, weapons, or native biology. That this one had been deposited here alone, with nothing but the rags on his body and a makeshift blade chipped from crashed debris, was not cruelty. It was a control test, a proving ground, a final data point. The human paused, adjusting the fraying strap on his shoulder. Blood, his own or not, spattered one sleeve. His breathing was audible, slow, not panicked. This perplexed her. The apex scent markers had been thick in the air for hours. Even a semi-intelligent creature should have sensed the boundary lines, the pheromonal warning trails, the silent thrum in the ground, signs that something else ruled here. But he kept walking, shoulders squared, jaw set, eyes scanning like twin targeting arrays. She adjusted her angle, zooming in on the curve of his spine, the twitch of muscle beneath skin. Her translator chirped softly as his lips moved. He was speaking, not to her, to himself. A low murmur, rhythmic. A ritual? A mnemonic? The translator struggled. Come and see. She logged the phrase, puzzled. It was not a plea, not a warning. An invitation? Then the forest answered. No footsteps, just a ripple in the underbrush, a shift in the chemical gradient, a silence too deep. The predator was close. Massive. One of the ridge-backed tyrants that made even orbital landers reroute. She activated the deep record protocol, ultra-high frame imaging, bone structure diagnostics. Every part of her programming screamed observe, but do not intervene. Branches snapped behind the human, followed by a hiss so low it seemed to come from the bedrock itself. The creature unfolded from the shadows like a living nightmare, 12 limbs, claws like obsidian, eyes like boiled glass. A head crowned with jagged bone ridges, breath steaming from flanged nostrils. It was already charging. The human turned. She expected him to freeze, scream, run, drop the blade and collapse as so many others had. It would have been logical. He grinned. Just a flicker of teeth, a curling at the corners of his mouth. Then he crouched, not away from the monster, but toward it, knife raised in one hand, the other curled into a fist. The scout's quills rose along her neck. The beast lunged, a streak of death. The human dove not back, but beneath and drove the blade upward. A splash of fluid arced into the air, sizzling on the ground. The creature shrieked, twisting midair. Claws raked across the human's back, tearing flesh, but he did not stop. He climbed the beast's side like it was a wall, stabbing, punching, screaming words that made no sense. The camera feed trembled as her stabilizers kicked in, compensating for the tremors in the earth. The beast thrashed, trying to dislodge him. But it was too late. The human had found the soft gap beneath the armored throat. The blade went in once, twice, and on the third plunge it stayed. The creature bucked violently and fell. When the dust settled, silence returned. The human stood atop the corpse, soaked in ichor, breathing hard. He looked up, straight into her lens, though cloaked, though hidden, though shielded. He couldn't see her, but he knew. He raised a middle finger to the trees, smirked, and whispered again, louder this time. Come and see. And for the first time in her professional existence, the scout forgot to record. The body of the predator steamed beneath the human's feet, its blood boiling in the open air, its last breath gurgling wetly through the ragged hole in its throat. The human stood over it like a relic from an ancient war god's dream, cloaked in gore, his chest rising and falling with a primal rhythm that stirred something unspeakable in the scout's chest cavity. Not fear, not awe, something older, something her ancestors had long since gene spliced out. She hovered lower, soundless in her shell, not daring to blink. Her lenses adjusted automatically, scanning the shredded meat and fractured bone beneath the human's bare feet. The predator's skull had split down the center from the force of its collapse, like the earth itself had cracked open beneath the human's will. Readings from the beast's internal mass suggested that it weighed over 400 kilograms, that it had reinforced spinal plating, that it had regenerative organs. None of that had saved it. The human dropped to a crouch, wiping his blade clean on the beast's scales. He didn't hesitate. He began harvesting. With mechanical efficiency, he carved out strips of muscle, flayed hide, exposed the sinew beneath the armored plates. He wasn't just feeding. He was crafting, setting aside talons, scooping out acid glands into a piece of scorched bark, stringing cords of tendon into rough shapes, all while humming softly to himself. Not a melody, a cadence. She recognized it now. It was the rhythm of someone keeping time. Ritualized focus. A battle trance, continuing even after the threat was gone. But the threat wasn't gone. Her threat triangulation node flared. Movement, east quadrant. Fast. Multiple contacts. 2. No 3. Small ground displacement at 4 points. The hunter was not alone. Others had come, drawn by blood, by the sound, by the death scream of an apex now fallen. She initiated the enhanced awareness overlay, marking each heat signature in her vision. They were circling, just outside of visual range. Intelligent, coordinated, testing the perimeter, waiting. The human knew. He didn't look up, didn't stop slicing tendon from bone, but his shoulders shifted, his back straightened. That animal part of him, the one that didn't need a HUD to read danger, was wide awake now. Then came the sound. Not a growl, not a roar, something worse. A click, soft, wet, echoing from every direction. The sound of mandibles tapping together. The call of the matriarchs. They were speaking. She translated automatically. Alpha, fallen, test now. The human rose slowly, holding 2 new blades fashioned from the predator's femur and sharpened spine. He didn't speak, didn't run. He turned toward the forest and stepped away from the carcass. He was inviting them. She adjusted her audio filters, suppressing the rising static. Her every protocol screamed for her to ascend, to observe from orbit if necessary, to avoid proximity during a live apex conflict. But she couldn't look away. Her claws trembled slightly on the control yoke of her hoverpod. Still she held position. Branches rustled, trees bent. Then they came. 4-legged, longer than hoverbikes, covered in chitin so black it drank in the sun. Their limbs glowed faintly with bioelectric pulses, like veins of fire under skin. Their eyes 8 each blinked in complex, asynchronous rhythms. They moved with a nightmare grace, flattening trees beneath them like grass. The largest stepped forward, head cocked. It smiled. The human smiled back. No roar, no charge. He walked, slow, deliberate. The lead matriarch hissed once and lunged. The others followed. What happened next defied every behavioral model in her library. The human didn't dodge, didn't parry. He slid beneath the lunging form, dropping to one knee, and drove both of his new blades into the predator's stomach in an upward V. The creature screamed, too late. Its mass twisted midair, colliding with its packmate. The second matriarch tumbled, snapping a tree in half. A claw swiped at the human's head. He caught it. She slowed the footage. Frame by frame, the muscles in his forearm exploded into definition. He caught the claw and used its momentum to flip the beast into a boulder. The bones cracked like eggshells. He moved through them like a conductor through a symphony. Each step precise. Each strike deliberate. No wasted motion. No hesitation. One leapt from the trees, aiming for his blind side. He ducked. He turned. He threw the spines hard like a javelin. It struck the creature in the eye. The force carried it 10 feet backward before it skidded into silence. Blood sprayed. A scream died in the air. She had never seen death so intimate. The last beast hesitated. It circled, growled low. The human dropped the second blade, opened his arms. He dared it. The matriarch charged, claws raised, jaw unhinged wide enough to swallow his head. He didn't move. At the last possible moment, he spun to the side, grabbed its jaw mid-snap, and twisted. The crunch echoed like thunder. The creature crashed into the dirt, spine bent the wrong way. The forest went silent again. Steam rose from wounds, both human and not. The man stood amid the corpses, breathing like a predator who hadn't finished his meal. Blood ran down his chest. One eye was swollen shut. He spat into the grass and looked to the sky. Not at the sun, not at the trees, at her, at whatever watched. I said come and see, he said. Don't just watch. The pod's comms module stuttered. Her heart whatever counted for one beat once, hard. He was talking to the gods. And they were listening. The storm broke in the distance with a sound like a world cracking in half. Thunder rolled over the treetops, chasing spears of violet lightning across the darkening sky, but below the canopy it was quiet. The kind of quiet that suggested even the ecosystem was unsure how to proceed. The predators were dead. Their remains were strewn across the clearing in various states of disassembly, limbs curled in their final spasms, blood soaking deep into the roots. None of them had made a clean kill. None had even come close. And in the center of it all, the human moved like an ancient ritual being played out across time. He wasn't finished. The scout's camouflaged shell clung motionless to a high crook in the tree, every sensor active, every subroutine frozen mid-cycle. Her entire focus, her entire being was trained on the human below, unable to understand what she was seeing, only able to witness. He stood barefoot now, boots long since discarded, walking through the battlefield like it was a training yard. He'd stripped down to a shredded vest and the remains of his trousers, both soaked in alien gore. His skin was a map of lacerations, bruises, and impact swelling, but his gait was strong, deliberate. There was no limp, no falter. If anything, he looked stronger than before. He dragged the corpse of the largest matriarch across the clearing, its bulk leaving a deep scar in the mossy earth, and propped it against a split tree trunk. He studied it like an engineer assessing raw material. Then, without hesitation, he began to take it apart. No tools, just fingers, just bone, just will. Chitin split under his hands as though it were bark. He reached into its body cavity, retrieving glowing organs with a practiced economy, setting them aside on a bed of flattened foliage. Acid sacs, power glands, tendons thick enough to use as cable. He was building something again. Always building. She realized with a jolt that he wasn't scavenging. He was improving. Every weapon he'd used so far had been adapted, repurposed, redesigned from the monsters around him. He wasn't surviving the death world. He was mastering it. A weak transmission pinged across her cranial array, a directive override. Her superior officer, high in orbit aboard the observation vessel Nytheres Reason, was watching now. Of course they were. The feed had long since gone viral among her kind. This wasn't just science anymore. It was spectacle. You are to recover a live blood sample. Immediate priority. Authorization theta level. Any means necessary. She stared at the message for a long moment. Recover? From him? She could barely track him in combat. How did they expect her to survive contact? Still, she knew she would obey. Because for the first time in her life, she wanted to understand. Wanted to know what made this creature. As she ran simulations in the background, the human stood suddenly and turned his head. Slowly, precisely. He looked straight at her again. The leaves didn't rustle. Her camo hadn't failed. But still he knew. He raised one hand, not in challenge this time, but in a signal. Fingers splayed, palm open. A greeting, no a message. He bent, dipped his hand in the matriarch's blood, and wrote a single word on the stone at his feet. Leave. Then he turned back to his work. But she didn't leave. She descended. Carefully, slowly. She activated full decloak and dropped through the last of the branches in a spiral, coming to rest 20 feet from him. Her shell hissed as it adjusted for ground contact. The human didn't react immediately. He finished his current task, coiling one of the beast's spinal cords into a whip, and only then turned toward her. No fear in his eyes. No anger. Just a stillness she hadn't seen in any sentient species. A readiness. Like if she so much as blinked wrong, he would be on her, and it wouldn't matter what armor she wore. I don't need a babysitter, he said, his voice hoarse but steady. She stepped forward, extending a mechanical arm. It held a simple injection needle. Clean, sterile, painless. He looked at it. Then he laughed. A quiet sound, but not soft. It was jagged and rough and full of something raw. You want my blood? He asked. She didn't answer. Her species communicated in compressed bursts, too fast for verbal speech, but the gesture was clear. He stepped forward. Too fast. Before she could react, he'd closed the distance and pressed one hand against her shell. Not an attack, an inspection. He studied her like he studied the predator bodies. Measured, analytical, noticing every joint, every plate. He tapped twice on her armor and grinned. You don't want to open this box, he murmured. You think I'm the outlier. I'm not. I'm the echo. She froze. A phrase from an old Terran transcript surfaced in her database, cross-referenced from ancient warfare archives. We're not dangerous because we're strong. We're dangerous because we're broken in the same place, together. He stepped back. Tell your masters this, he said. I bleed when I want, not when I'm told. Then he took the needle from her hand and plunged it into his own neck. One clean motion. He handed it back, filled with glowing red. She accepted it with silent reverence. The storm above cracked again, but this time it didn't sound like thunder. It sounded like drums. The needle pulsed in her grasp, warm through the reinforced gloves of her exoform. Red, thick, still alive, somehow. Human blood, destabilized at the surface, never should have survived atmospheric exposure on a Class X death world, but it throbbed in the vial like it refused to die. Microdiagnostics sparked across her HUD, attempting to catalog its contents. They failed. The blood wasn't just human anymore. He had changed. Or the planet had changed him. Or worse, he had adapted faster than the world meant to kill him. She looked up. He was gone. Not vanished. Just moved. As if space itself folded to let him step elsewhere. One moment he'd been 10 feet from her, the needle still wet in her hand. The next, he was perched on the shattered trunk of the fallen predator, arms crossed, watching her with the same expressionless scrutiny she'd reserved for lab specimens. No sound. No movement. Just there. Her stabilizers clicked on reflex, adjusting for a terrain shift that hadn't come. It was psychological, an illusion of dominance. But still her fingers twitched toward her defense module. He tilted his head. She froze. Challenge in his posture. Warning in his silence. Then he spoke. You came down here to collect blood, he said. But that's not what you really want. Her voice modulator engaged. No point hiding now. What do you believe I want? He looked up, toward the roiling black clouds. The canopy was being peeled back by the wind. Strands of bioluminescent pollen swirled in the air like glowing ash. "You want a story," he said. "All of you. Watching from your metal sky hives. Recording my every step like I'm a rat in a maze." He stood, stepped off the corpse and walked toward her again, not threatening, just inevitable. "You want to know why I fight like this? Why I don't run? Why I don't break?" He stopped 2 meters away. "You won't like the answer." She began recording again anyway. He gestured to the field of corpses. "They send death after me, over and over, and I don't die, so now they're wondering if I'm the monster." She stayed still. "You want the truth?" he asked, then bared his teeth, nod in a smile. "In memory. I died already, not here, not now, long before you dropped me on this rock. You don't understand what you're looking at." He tapped his chest. "This isn't survival. It's aftermath." Lightning flashed behind him. He turned and began walking again. No direction, just movement, just forward. She followed, not by command, not by directive, because something deep within her cranial core, something residual and ancient, needed to. They walked in silence. The trees thinned as they moved into a glade littered with bones, some stripped, others untouched. An ancient kill site. The air stank of ammonia and copper. A black monolith rose at the center, half sunken in moss and bloodstone, etched with claw marks and crude symbols. The human paused. "This is where they buried their own," he said softly. She scanned. Life forms none. Radiation trace. Stone Age relics mixed with primal detritus. Nothing recent. Nothing dangerous. Until she saw the marks on the monolith. They weren't from local predators. They were letters. Latin script. English. Her head translated. "If you're reading this, then we died screaming. We hurt them first. Remember us." She realized the truth. He wasn't the first. He was the last. His silence stretched, heavy and reverent. "I found this on my second day," he murmured. "Didn't even know what planet I was on yet. But I knew what it meant." He touched the stone. "I wasn't chosen. I was sentenced." The sky cracked again, not lightning this time but heat. Something unnatural. Something descending. Her communicator flared. "Orbital deployment inbound. Combat class Leviathan drone. Observe human response." She looked up. A star fell. No, not a star. A machine. Burning red. The size of a small cathedral. Covered in weapons. Anti-grav fields humming like a demon choir. It slammed into the clearing with enough force to crater the earth. Dust billowed in every direction. From its center, the drone unfurled. 6 legs. 40 weapon ports. Plasma vents glowing. An AI brain rated for planetary siege. The message was clear. No more observing. This was a final test. The scout stumbled back. She wasn't meant to be here for this. She'd crossed the line between observation and presence. The gods had grown impatient. But the human didn't flinch. He stared at the machine, then cracked his neck. "I was wondering when they'd stop sending dogs and try a god." The drone's weapons powered. He stepped forward, unarmed. He whispered something too quiet for her translator. Then he charged. What happened next, she couldn't follow. Not with tech. Not with sensors. Only with eyes. He dodged plasma. Dodged it. Moved through the gaps in light like the laws of physics asked permission before touching him. Climbed the machine's leg, drove a sharpened bone through its vent port, ripped out a cable, and jammed it into his own wound. The machine screamed. Yes, screamed. Sound burst from it as if it had a soul and he was extracting it. The drone staggered, tried to rise. Its weapons spun wild. He tore its eye out. One punch. Metal shattered like ice under pressure. She could barely breathe. He stood atop it now, looking up at the sky again. "I told you," he said. "Come and see." And then he vanished into the trees, leaving gods, monsters, and machines behind. The forest did not heal after his passage. It remembered. The wreckage of the Leviathan drone still hissed in its crater, split down the center like some ancient god whose time had come to die. Its core continued to pulse with dying light, a rhythmic twitch of expired breath, as if the machine could not yet accept its defeat. Her sensors tried to collect data, but everything, absolutely everything, was corrupted. Biological markers, electromagnetic residue, radiation scans. All static. All useless. Like the land itself had rejected interpretation. The human had left nothing but consequences in his wake. And he was gone again. Not hidden. Not fleeing. Just beyond reach. He had a way of moving that defied logic. He could cross terrain faster than her drones. Leave no tracks, yet tear his enemies into pulp. He belonged here in the same way that fire belonged to lightning or blood belonged to the heart. Still, she followed. Not by directive anymore. The command feed from orbit had gone silent after the drone failed. No updates. No further instruction. Even the commander's override codes had flatlined into static. The data link, once a lifeline, now felt like a chain around her throat. She chose to follow. The jungle thickened around her shell, its vines responding with a subtle awareness she hadn't logged before. They curled away from her path. not indifference but avoidance. As if her presence was now tied to his. As if the land recognized the scent of him. There was no wind, only the wet heat of living things and the electric tension of a world watching. She found him near a river, naked from the waist up, soaked in red clay and sweat, kneeling beside a fallen tree. He was carving something long, curved, a bow, primitive, perfect. The string glinted with fibers from predator sinew, glistening in the filtered sunlight. His hands moved with the certainty of someone who had built survival, not inherited it. She didn't speak. He didn't look up, not at first, but after a moment, he said, "I'm not your enemy." It wasn't a defense. It was a truth, a cold one, like a blade left on stone overnight. She responded with the only question that mattered. "Then what are you?" He finished carving the last inch of the bow, then ran a calloused thumb along the grain. When he stood, he looked older, not by age but by memory, worn at the edges, hardened through repetition. "I was a father," he said. The admission stopped her. No context, no elaboration, just a single thread into a vast web of pain. He began walking along the riverbank, gesturing for her to follow. She did, not out of command, not even curiosity, out of respect. The world shifted as they moved. Trees arched overhead like cathedral vaults, and the river became a mirror for the stormlit sky above. He didn't speak for a long time, but she catalogued every motion: how he felt the wind before it shifted, how he stepped around moss that had carnivorous roots, how he touched the bark of one tree in particular and whispered something that didn't translate. Then, at last, he said, "They took my daughter." It wasn't a metaphor. He kept walking. His voice never changed. "I worked off-world security. Resource moon near the Orion fracture. Clean job. Good credits. My wife stayed Earthside with Mia. 6 years old. Wanted to be an engineer. She used to draw blueprints on the walls with her crayons." He smiled, not a happy smile. "They pulled me out of hypersleep during the jump back. Said there was a situation, a delay. She was gone. All of them." He stopped walking. "They said it was an accident, an explosion, but I've seen accident reports, and I know when something's been scrubbed. It was a test site, unregistered." The scout stood still, no movement, no sound. He looked at her. "That's what you don't understand. You think I'm surviving for myself. I'm not. I'm surviving so I can remember her longer than they do." He reached into his belt and pulled something out. A drawing, smudged, faded, child's ink, stick figures, a house with solar panels, a man with spiky hair holding a little girl's hand. He tucked it away before the rain could touch it. "She didn't get to grow teeth, ride a bike, get scared and come into our bed at night. All I have is this, and the rage of it doesn't go away." He looked back at the river. "So when they dropped me here, they thought they were throwing me away. They thought this world would devour me like it did the others. But I already died." He pointed upstream. "They think this world is a prison. It's not. It's a crucible, and I'm not the only one left." That stopped her. Not the words, the implication. He turned to her fully now. "You want a report? Tell your people this. There are more of us. Survivors. Left behind. Abandoned. Broken. And this planet, it doesn't just kill. It teaches. We've been learning." He lifted the bow. "We're coming." The storm cracked open the sky above, and in the reflection of his eyes, she saw shapes move within the clouds. Not machines. Dropships. Old. Rusted. Buried deep. But rising. Her breath caught. This was the story, not of one man against a death world, but of a species that refused to go quietly. And the gods above had no idea what they'd unleashed. The jungle had always whispered, but now it spoke. Not in words. Not in anything a sensor could track or a comms unit could parse. But the air was different. The light bled darker through the canopy. Even the wind seemed to circle differently around the man she followed, like the world was beginning to listen to him. They moved through terrain that should have been impossible: razorvine fields that sliced open hardened alloy, valleys filled with spore mist so dense even her vision filters blurred into whiteout. But he walked through it all with an instinct that outpaced her data. He wasn't navigating, he was leading, and she followed, not because she was ordered to. The command line from orbit was now permanently severed. Her uplink had gone cold the moment he'd spoken of the others like him. The overseers had gone silent, which, in her experience, was worse than threats. It meant they were afraid. The man stopped at the edge of a rise. Before them stretched a basin, a long-forgotten crater, swallowed by time and regrowth. And in its heart, wreckage. Hundreds of ships, old, shattered, gutted, earth-made but fused with local stone and biogrowth. Not scrap shelter. The way roots curl through bone. The way fungi repurpose what's dead into new life. She scanned them. Hulls from multiple decades. Different classes. Some civilian, some military. All ancient. All buried. "My people were never meant to survive here," the man said, crouching on the slope, brushing away a layer of moss. Beneath it an insignia, Earth Alliance. faded to nearly nothing. They were dumped, or crash-landed, or exiled, doesn't matter anymore. He stood again and looked out over the basin. They stopped trying to escape, started trying to endure, then to adapt. Her sensors picked up the faintest heat signatures, heartbeats, low and slow, too regulated to be feral, too quiet to be machine. She hadn't even noticed them. Camouflaged against the walls of the crater, nestled among moss-covered plating and vine-wrapped scaffolding humans, watching, silent, eyes like his. They stepped forward one at a time, old, young, hardened, scarred, painted in dust and blood and ash, not soldiers, not animals, weapons. Her threat detection pinged, and failed. These weren't wart-rained bodies. They were battle-tempered minds. The kind that didn't break under pressure, because pressure was where they were born. One of them approached, a woman. Her right arm was gone, replaced with a splint of bone and metal, wrapped in tendon. Her left eye glowed faintly blue, an earthside neural implant, long obsolete, but still functioning. She looked the scout over like one might assess a puzzle with missing pieces. "This one of theirs?" the woman asked. The man nodded. "She came for blood," he said. "Now she's here for truth." The woman gave a dry laugh. "She might wish for death instead." Another voice, older, male. "We've been watching the skies. Saw their little toys come and go. Thought they'd finally gotten bored." "They haven't," the man replied. "They've gotten desperate." The elder looked to the scout now. She felt the weight of his stare settle like cold iron. "You think we're just ghosts in the dirt," he said. "But we built something you can't analyze." He held up a device. It looked like a communicator, ancient, cracked, but she recognized the pulse immediately. A coded frequency, not one the overseers used. One she used. He activated it. Instantly her systems locked. Memory feeds froze. Internal logs corrupted. The hardline interface that connected her to the orbital database gone. Like a knife had been slipped between her skull and her mind. She staggered back, eyes wide behind her visor. The old man smiled grimly. "You don't get to steal us anymore." The younger man, the one she'd followed all this way, stepped forward and caught her arm gently. "I told you this wasn't about survival," he said. "It's about memory, and now we're taking it back." She struggled to reboot her internal nodes, but the system was locked in a loop. Her entire frame no longer reported back to the fleet. Her movements were her own, but her purpose had been severed. She was free, but adrift. She looked up at him. "Why show me this?" she asked. He crouched down beside her, hands bloody from clay and war. "Because even machines deserve to choose what they become." Then he handed her a stone. "No markings. Just weight. Earth-made. Weathered. We carved that from the cliffs near the Valley of Bones. Took a long time. You'll find the others marked with it. There are more of us than you know." Her fingers closed around it instinctively. Something inside her, some algorithm, some ghost of a protocol flickered. The humans around them began to move. Not in fear, not in alarm, but in formation. They donned armor made from wreckage, slung blades made from predator fangs, activated shields woven from harvested energy glands. Primitive and impossible, yet brilliant. They did not march like an army. They moved like a force of nature, evolved to defy. And above them the sky cracked again. Not lightning, not ships, but the scream of re-entry. Dozens, hundreds. Another deployment. This time not machines, but them. Soldiers, overseer infantry, descending to wipe out the infestation. The man looked up, face calm. "I think it's time we said hello." The sky peeled apart like a wound. White-hot streaks fell in clusters, burning trails of vengeance into the clouds. Dropships, compact, efficient, painted black with the sterile finality of obedience. No insignias, no flags, just mad armor, bristling with weapons. They didn't come to question. They came to erase. The scout stood among the humans at the edge of the basin, stone still clutched in her palm. Her systems had restarted just enough to count. 43 dropships. Standard combat load, 30 troopers each. That was nearly 1,300 soldiers. Genetically enhanced, psych-conditioned, armed with Tier 9 anti-biological weaponry. She knew the protocol. She'd followed the protocol. This wasn't suppression. It was extermination. And still, none of the humans ran. The man she had followed all this way stood at the center of them, still shirtless, still streaked in clay and blood. He watched the descent without fear, without ceremony, just patience. He turned to her, eyes sharp. "You wanted to know what we were." He nodded to the basin. "Watch." The dropships hit the outskirts first, landing in coordinated rhythm, perfect arcs of movement, synchronized like clockwork. Their doors hissed open with serpentine grace, and the soldiers poured out. Uniform, identical, faces hidden. Each one moved with terrifying efficiency, dispersing into flanking formations, scanners out, weapons raised. No announcements, no negotiations, just silence and strategy. The human line remained still. Then the man raised one hand. A single gesture, not to the soldiers, to the jungle. It responded. The trees shifted. The vines snapped taut like drawn wires. Something moved beneath the soil, not just beasts, but design. Out of the mist came shapes. Not human, not entirely. Hybrid forms. Armor grafted from insect chitin. Blades made from broken ship hulls and predator teeth. Mutated warbeasts, bristling with biocircuitry, eyes glowing in the dark like distant stars. These were the forgotten, the ones who hadn't just survived. They had become part of the world itself. The soldier line paused, just for a heartbeat, and the jungle exploded, not in chaos, in precision. Snares activated beneath the feet of the invaders, trip mines crafted from venom sacs and thermal charge cores. Spines shot from the ground like metal thorns. Something roared from beneath the tree canopy and fell, a beast the size of a dropship, clad in reactive plating and draped in camouflage moss, slamming into the enemy lines with the weight of vengeance. The humans moved then, not as individuals, as a pack, silent, coordinated, deadly. They struck from angles that no formation could cover, through trees, from beneath roots, over sheer stone walls. Arrows glowed with EM-tipped heads. Spears carried neurotoxins that bypassed armored filtration. Old weapons, new ideas. The scout watched in stunned silence as the most elite soldiers in the galaxy were slaughtered, not because they were weak, but because they had never learned how to fight something that learned faster. She moved without realizing. Her instincts were still tactical, honed by thousands of simulations. A soldier broke through the first line of jungle to her left, armor scorched but intact, rifle raised. Reflex took her. She pivoted, caught the arm as it aimed, and brought her knee into the trooper's helmet. It cracked on impact. He staggered, fired wild. The shot burned a tree to cinders behind her. A second trooper emerged. She ducked under the swing of a shock baton and swept his legs. He fell, and the man, her human, was there in an instant. No sound, no words, just a blade through the visor. The body twitched once, stilled. He looked at her. "You're still with them?" She shook her head. "No," she said. His eyes studied hers, as if checking for fractures in the truth. Then he nodded and turned back to the war unfolding. Above them, the rest of the dropships descended. The air screamed with them. But now the basin had changed. It was not just a hiding place. It was a fortress. Biowalls unfolded from stone. Shield webs crackled between vine-covered towers. Gun emplacements, powered by geothermal conduits hacked from old crash sites, whirred to life and spat shrapnel and fire into the sky. She stared in disbelief. This wasn't random rebellion. It was planned. "Years," the man said, standing beside her. "We've been preparing for years. They thought we were scattered, but we've been watching, learning, adapting." She turned to him. "And if they send more," he looked up, "they will." His voice never wavered. "And we'll kill them too." She scanned the battlefield again. Her people, her former people, were dying in droves. Not because they were unskilled, but because they were predictable. Every tactic was a known variable. Every algorithm a weakness. And these humans, they had rewritten the script. Her comms blinked once. The orbital channel, back online. She accepted it. Scout 12, came the voice. Cold, distant, overseer level. "Status report." She looked at the man, at the war. Then she answered. "They're not human anymore." Silence on the other end. "There's something worse," she said, and cut the line. The battlefield had quieted, but only on the surface. Ash hung in the air like ancient breath. Fires burned low, guttering in the heavy, wet wind. The basin was streaked with black scorch marks and broken armor. The ground was slick with blood, human, altered, and synthetic. And yet, no one celebrated. Victory was not an emotion here. It was a necessity. A moment bought with fury. She stood on the upper ridge now, alone, watching the last of the dropships smolder. The jungle had already begun its reclamation, roots crawling into cracks in the hull, vines weaving around weapons still warm. It devoured the invaders like it had waited centuries to do so. Her systems had fully stabilized. She could hear the command line again, hear the endless churn of questions from orbit, desperate for intel, demanding control, begging for understanding. She answered none of it. Instead, she stood with a single rifle strapped to her back and a data core in her hand, one she had extracted from the remains of a fallen overseer trooper, before the jungle consumed even the metal. Inside the core, combat protocols, orders, fleet manifests. All of it encrypted, all of it now hers. Footsteps crunched behind her, deliberate. She turned. The man had changed again. His body was cut open in 3 places, blood still drying on his ribs. But he moved like it didn't matter. He wore new armor, if it could be called that. Strips of old earth alloy fused to bone plates, inscribed with symbols she didn't recognize. His face was calmer than before, not softer, just centered. "There'll be another wave," she said. He nodded. "Always is. They'll send warships next. Not just troops. Fusion bombardment, glassing operations. They've tried it," he said. She blinked. "You survived orbital fire." He pointed toward the eastern ridge, and she saw it carved into the far cliffs like a wound in the mountain. a massive crater, too wide, too symmetrical to be natural. The stone there was blackened, fused, but not melted through. The surrounding jungle still lived. "We found a way," he said. He gestured upward, not at the clouds, but at the sky beyond them. "They burn from above. But this planet she has skin thicker than they know. We burrowed, built below. Let them think they'd won. You let them. Every time they think they buried us, we grow back sharper." He knelt and pulled a chunk of metal from the dirt. It was part of a trooper's helmet, the lens cracked but still faintly glowing. He crushed it in one hand, fingers closing around it with slow, deliberate pressure until the casing snapped and the circuitry died. She watched. "I was like them once," he said. "Trained, obedient, never questioned. Thought control meant safety." He stood again, tossing the scrap to the ground. "Now I see what freedom costs. It's not peace. It's clarity." He looked at her fully then. "And you?" She didn't answer. Couldn't, not yet. She'd been built to serve. Not to choose. Not truly. But now there was no command chain left for her. No purpose. Only what she made. And what she made would begin here. She handed him the data core. "I extracted it from the high-rank unit that breached the inner line. It'll have fleet routes, tactical orders, possibly orbital deployments." He took it without a word, but his gaze sharpened. He understood the meaning behind the act. Not aid. Alliance. She crouched beside him, running her fingers through the scorched earth. There were bones under their old and new. This land had always been layered in death. But now, it grew something stronger than memory. She glanced at the jungle beyond, where the other survivors were rebuilding barriers, hauling the dead, forging new weapons from wreckage. There were children there too, watching, learning, laughing, even in the way children could, like the universe hadn't tried to kill them 100 times over. "They'll bring new tactics," she said. "They always evolve." He smiled faintly. "So do we." She looked at him sideways. "There's still time to run," she offered. His eyes went cold. "No," he said. "There's only time to teach." He stood, turned to the basin, raised his voice. "Gather the council." Men and women emerged from shadowed paths, from the cracks in stone and the hollows of trees. One by one, dozens, then more. Not soldiers, not politicians, but leaders, every one of them worn by war, every one carrying the weight of generations. The man held up the data core. "They know where we are. They always have." No one moved. No one spoke. "So we stop hiding." He turned to her again, his voice louder now, meant for all to hear. "She came from them. But she stood with us." A few eyes turned to her. Not all friendly. Not yet. But open. She saw what they did. What they'll do again. "And she brought us this." He held the core aloft. "They'll come in force. With fire and fury. With gods in metal skins. But we don't just bleed anymore." He let the core drop to the earth. "We bite." Cheers didn't rise. Applause didn't echo. Only resolve. Only the quiet, collective sound of people preparing for war. And in that moment, she knew what she had become. Not a scout. Not a machine. But a witness. And the age of empires was about to end in blood and soil. The jungle exhaled under a moonless sky, and the stars above were wrong. Not just unfamiliar wrong. Their patterns shifted unnaturally, flickering in ways they shouldn't. She stood on a cliff's edge beside the man, looking up. There were no clouds, no atmospheric interference, but the stars blurred and twisted, as if space itself was being rewritten. He noticed her stare. "They're coming," he said. She adjusted her optical focus. The distortion wasn't illusion. It was heat, massive heat, subtle gravitational displacement, signatures that preceded only one thing: warp breach. Several of them, and large. "They're bypassing atmospheric entry protocols," she said. "No slow descent this time. No dropships. They're not sending soldiers anymore," he murmured. "They're sending gods." The sky split. Not in color. In logic. The stars bled. Soundless, golden lines cut across the heavens like fractures in reality, and through them came three shapes, each one a titan. Not ships. Engines of extinction. Spine-thin, long as cities, their hulls were covered in layers of living armor. Each pulsed with nuclear heartbeats. No windows. No weapons. Just presence. They weren't designed to fire from a distance. They were designed to descend. Land. Crush. Her neural link, still active on fragmented channels, pinged once. Even without full command access, the names came through. Juggernauts. Class 12 exocolors. Banned from use in civilian sectors. Never deployed within atmosphere. Each one powered by an AI whose consciousness had been stripped of empathy and fear. She had seen videos. Brief flashes of simulations. Cities turned to silence in moments. Resistance ground into data and archived. These machines were the final word in control. But the man beside her? He didn't flinch. He simply turned and walked back toward the basin. "They want us to run," he said. "To scatter. Split. Make ourselves small." "You won't," she replied. He smiled. "We can't." The humans below were already moving. The council had splintered into cells. Runners carrying coded instructions darted between stone corridors and jungle paths. Children were gathered into the deep hollows. Elders armed themselves with relics wrapped in cloth, rusted, well-kept weapons too heavy for their age, yet lifted with reverence. She followed the man to the central chamber, a hollow carved into the cliffside, where heat radiated from the ground itself. The walls were covered in drawings. Primitive at first glance: charcoal, ash, dried blood, but not random. A timeline, crash sites, massacres, the uprising, hidden cities, the shift, and at the end new symbols, sharp angles, eyes, stars. She saw herself drawn there. Her own visor, crude but clear. He caught her staring. "You were always part of the story," he said. "We just didn't know when. You drew this before I came." He nodded. "Years ago." "That's not possible." He shrugged. "It doesn't matter if it is. You're here now." A rumble split the air. The mountain groaned. Dust fell from the chamber ceiling. Above them, the sky wept metal. The first of the exocolors began its descent. She accessed every schematic she could. None matched. No known countermeasures. No weak points. Just mass and function and inevitability. "How do you fight something with no heart?" she asked. The man pressed his hand against the chamber wall. A hidden seam hissed open. From the darkness, two others emerged. One was the woman with the missing arm and the glowing eye. The other, an old man wrapped in armor made of tooth and flame-scorched hull. Between them, they carried something heavy. They laid it on the stone. At first, it looked like a weapon, but it was more than that. It pulsed. Alive. Fused circuitry with organic logic. A brain. No, a seed. Neither Earth nor entirely alien. Something new. "The jungle taught us," the man said. "The wreckage fed us. The old machines gave us language. We didn't just survive down here." He looked up at her. "We evolved." She stepped forward, scanning the object. It was dormant. Barely. Inside it hints of a consciousness. Not artificial. Not human. But aware. Waiting. "It's not a weapon," she whispered. "It's an answer," he said. Another rumble. A closer one. The basin shook. The stone trembled. The first juggernaut was descending directly onto them. "No time left," said the old man. The woman placed her hand on the seed's surface. Her eye flashed, and for a moment, the seed glowed in response. The air around it bent. Sound cracked like glass. Somewhere beyond physics, something woke up. The man turned to her. "We've always adapted. Now we ask, will you?" She looked at him. At the people. At the children huddled deep. At the mountain above, soon to be flattened by an unstoppable god machine. And she stepped forward. Kneeling, she placed her hand atop the seed. Her system screamed. Alerts. Fail-safes. Protocols snapping one by one. But she held firm. Her visor went dark. Then light. A new interface. Not code. Instinct. The seed merged. With her. And the mountain roared. Not in collapse. In resistance. From beneath the earth, something rose. Stone. Metal. Root. Bone. Not a structure. Not a ship. A being. Born of earth. Forged in death. A titan of their own. Their answer to the gods from the sky. And now, the war for the future would not be fought by armies. It would be decided by evolution itself. The ground trembled beneath their feet like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant stirred from its agile rest. The juggernaut's shadow swept across the basin, blackening the trees, freezing the air, and chilling every breath taken by those who watched. Time slowed, every sound muted into a heavy silence that pressed into the bones. The unstoppable machine was descending not as a warship, but as a titan with a single purpose: annihilation. She stood at the forefront, the newly awakened seed pulsing beneath her palm, a fusion of technology and something ancient, something alive. The symbiosis was unfamiliar, raw, but it was already changing her. Her senses sharpened beyond the limitations of human or machine. Thoughts and emotions blended into a singular, fierce clarity. The line between her mind and the seed blurred until it vanished altogether. She became part of the living network that thrummed through the soil, the roots, and the stones beneath the surface. The man beside her watched with a mixture of awe and resolve. The old woman and the elder flanked them, eyes locked on the horizon where the juggernaut's feet crushed the first layers of forest. Every step it took was a promise of ruin, a cathedral of metal and fire built to erase resistance and hope alike. But here, in this moment, something ancient stirred. The earth beneath the machine responded as if recognizing a predator. The roots twisted upward, breaking through the stone and metal, weaving into a living cage. Vines thicker than arms lashed at the legs of the juggernaut, entangling pistons and servos. The ground itself cracked open, sending shards of earth and bursts of glowing bioenergy into the air. The titan roared, an unearthly sound that vibrated through the mountain, but the earth was no longer inert. It fought back. She reached deeper into the seed's essence, drawing from it the wisdom encoded in a language not spoken but felt. Patterns emerged in her mind, strategies not born of logic alone, but of instinct and symbiosis. The Titan's armor was adaptive, its AI ruthless, but it could not predict the full complexity of a living planet's wrath. With a surge of power, she projected a wave through the soil, a pulse of energy that disrupted the juggernaut's systems, sending sparks cascading across its hull. The Titan faltered, momentarily confused by the living network that now extended through her. Vines constricted tighter, crushing hydraulics and severing circuits with brutal precision. The humans below rallied, their fear turning to fierce hope. From makeshift battlements, they unleashed their weapons. Electromagnetic pulses, bioplasma charges, and ancient relics were forged with newfound technology. The forest echoed with the cries of battle, but this was no longer a simple fight for survival. It was a symphony of evolution and resistance. The juggernaut lashed out, crushing trees and tearing the earth, but every assault only deepened its bindings. Slowly, inexorably, the machine was brought low. The mountain groaned as the roots pulled the Titan into a pit of their own making, dragging it beneath the surface in a final act of defiance. She collapsed to her knees, breath ragged but spirit unbroken. The seat's glow faded, returning to a quiet pulse as it melded fully with the land. Around her, the survivors began to exhale, the weight of despair lifting with the dawn. The man approached, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "This is only the beginning," he said. "They will return, but now we have the power to stand not as scattered prey, but as one." She looked out over the basin, where life was already returning, where scars were healing beneath new growth. The war was far from over, but the balance had shifted. No longer hunted, no longer broken, now they were the apex. The future would be forged by those who could adapt, who could become more than machines, or men who could become legend. And in that new dawn, she would lead. Because she had seen humanity rip an apex predator into chunks like nothing. And now, she was part of the predator's legacy.